Imagine a people who never built cities, never raised stone palaces, and left behind no books to tell their own story. And yet, they were so feared that mighty empires like Persia and Greece trembled at the sound of their name. They lived on the endless grasslands of Eurasia, moving with the seasons as if the wind itself was their home. They were the Scythians, legendary horsemen, master archers, rulers of the vast steppe stretching thousands of miles. History remembers them as shadows across the plains, hard to find, impossible to conquer. But who were they really? And how could a nation without walls or kings become a legend etched into world history? Let's begin the journey. Long before the great empires of the world carved their names into stone and history books, there were vast, open lands stretching endlessly across Eurasia. This immense region, known as the steppe, was a sea of grassland that connected Europe and Asia like a living bridge. It was here, in this seemingly endless horizon, that one of the most fascinating peoples of the ancient world first emerged: the Scythians. The story of the Scythians begins not with stone cities or towering monuments, but with horses, wind, and the rhythm of a nomadic life. Unlike civilizations that grew around fertile rivers such as the Nile, the Tigris, or the Yangtze, the Scythians built their world on movement. They were a people of the saddle, their identity tied to their ability to travel swiftly across the open plains. For them, freedom was not measured in walls or borders, but in how far the horizon stretched before them. Geography shaped everything about the Scythians. The Eurasian steppe was not an easy place to live. Winters were long and bitterly cold, while summers could be hot and dry. Unlike river valleys where farming flourished, the steppe offered little in the way of fertile soil. Instead, it was a land of grazing fields, ideal for herds of horses, sheep, and cattle. The Scythians adapted perfectly to this environment. They were expert herders, moving their animals from pasture to pasture in search of fresh grass. Their homes were not permanent structures of stone, but portable tents made of felt and wood, which could be taken down, packed, and carried with them as they journeyed across the plains. This lifestyle gave them unmatched mobility, and soon it also gave them power. For while other peoples were bound to the land they farmed, the Scythians were bound to no single place. They could appear on the horizon without warning, vanish just as quickly, and travel distances that would have taken other cultures weeks or months. Their land may have looked empty, but it was alive with movement, stories, and traditions that would echo through centuries. If one were to name the single most important partner of the Scythians, it would not be another human being, but the horse. The Scythians are often remembered as some of the earliest masters of mounted life. While many other cultures used horses to pull chariots, the Scythians developed an extraordinary skill for riding directly on horseback. From childhood, Scythian boys and girls learned to ride. A horse was not just a means of transportation, but a companion, a source of food, and even a symbol of wealth and status. The Scythians bred strong and resilient horses capable of surviving the harsh climate of the steppe. Over time, their mastery of horsemanship allowed them to travel vast distances, maintain control over wide territories, and connect faraway peoples through trade and exchange. This deep bond with horses also shaped their worldview. The horse became a central figure in their myths and spiritual beliefs. Many of the ancient Scythian burial sites discovered by archaeologists reveal horses buried alongside their human companions, suggesting that they were seen as essential not just in life, but also in the journey after death. Like many ancient peoples, the Scythians explained the mysteries of life through stories and myths. According to one tradition recorded by Greek historians, the Scythians believed they were descended from a mythical hero who was part human and part divine. This ancestor, it was said, received gifts from the gods: a plow, a yoke, a cup, and a battle-axe. Each of these objects represented an essential aspect of Scythian life: farming, herding, ritual, and defense. Religion for the Scythians was not centralized in great temples or monuments. Instead, it was woven into the rhythms of daily existence. They honored deities connected to the sky, the earth, and the forces of nature around them. Fire, water, and the endless steppe itself were all sacred. Their spiritual practices often involved rituals under the open sky, with the wide horizon serving as their temple walls. This connection to nature also influenced their art. Scythian goldwork, discovered in burial mounds across Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan, often depicts animals in intricate, flowing designs. Deer, eagles, and panthers twist and turn in golden ornaments, symbolizing both the natural world they lived in and the spiritual power they believed flowed through it. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Scythians in their earliest days was their lack of fixed borders. Unlike the Greeks, Persians, or Egyptians, who built cities, monuments, and empires with clear boundaries, the Scythians defined their world through movement. Their territory was not marked by walls or fences, but by where their herds grazed and where their horses could carry them. This does not mean they were isolated. On the contrary, the Scythians became part of one of the earliest global networks of exchange. Their location on the steppe placed them at the crossroads between Europe and Asia. Through them flowed goods, ideas, and stories. They traded with neighboring peoples, exchanging animal products, furs, and crafted goods for metal, textiles, and luxury items. Over time, they would connect distant civilizations that otherwise might never have encountered one another. Even in their beginnings, the Scythians fascinated outsiders. Greek historians such as Herodotus wrote extensively about them, describing their customs, clothing, and way of life. To the Greeks, who valued cities and fixed settlements, the Scythians were both mysterious and admirable. They were seen as free people who lived without walls, bound by their own traditions and the vastness of their land. Yet, for all the fascination, the Scythians also remained elusive. They left no written records of their own. What we know about them comes from archaeology, burial mounds filled with treasures, and from the accounts of their neighbors. This gives their story an air of mystery. Unlike other civilizations whose histories were written down in chronicles and carved into stone, the Scythians live on in fragments, waiting to be pieced together. The beginning of the Scythian story is not just about survival in a harsh land, but about creativity, adaptability, and identity. They proved that a people did not need permanent cities or stone monuments to leave a mark on history. Instead, their legacy would be carried in their skills, their art, their horses, and the awe they inspired in those who encountered them. In many ways, the Scythians were pioneers of a different kind of civilization, one not rooted in the soil but in the saddle, one not measured in walls but in horizons. As we move forward in their story, we will see how this foundation allowed them to grow into one of the most influential cultures of the ancient world. Feared by mighty empires and admired for their freedom, the open steppe was their cradle, the horse their constant companion, and the horizon their guiding star. This was the beginning of the Scythians, a people whose legend was only just unfolding. When the Scythians first appeared on the stage of history, they were seen as mysterious wanderers of the steppe. But over time, these nomadic horsemen grew into something far greater, a powerful society that left a lasting impression on the ancient world. The period between the 8th and 3rd centuries BCE is often considered the classical age of the Scythians, when their culture flourished, their power expanded, and their image became firmly imprinted in the minds of neighboring civilizations. In their early days, the Scythians were loosely organized tribes moving across the Eurasian grasslands. But by the 8th century BCE, they had begun to consolidate. No single king or empire controlled them in the way cities controlled their citizens. Instead, the Scythians were united by shared customs, alliances, and, above all, their nomadic way of life. This lack of a rigid hierarchy might sound like a weakness, but for the Scythians, it was a strength. Their mobility allowed them to respond quickly to challenges, and their tribal networks created flexible systems of cooperation. Some tribes specialized in herding, while others focused on trade or warfare. Together, they formed a loose but effective web of power across the steppe. By the 7th century BCE, the Scythians had become a recognized force in the region. Their reputation was not just as herders or wanderers, but as formidable horse riders who could appear suddenly and control vast stretches of land. Neighboring peoples, including the Persians, Greeks, and Assyrians, began to take notice. The defining feature of Scythian power was their unparalleled mastery of mounted warfare. While many civilizations used infantry or chariots, the Scythians perfected a technique that astonished their enemies, shooting arrows while riding at full speed. The composite bow they carried was a technological marvel for its time. Made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, it was small enough to be used on horseback but powerful enough to shoot arrows over long distances. A Scythian rider could fire accurately in any direction, even while retreating. Ancient writers often marveled at this skill, noting how Scythians could rain arrows from the sky before their opponents could even close the distance. This combination of speed, agility, and precision made them nearly unstoppable in open terrain. It also gave them a fearsome reputation. To settled civilizations that relied on walls and heavy infantry, the Scythians represented a new and unpredictable kind of power, one that could not easily be contained. Despite their fearsome image, the Scythians were not simply a people of conflict. Their society was complex, with roles for men and women that were more balanced than in many contemporary cultures. Archaeological discoveries reveal that some Scythian women held high status and were buried with weapons, ornaments, and symbols of leadership. This has led many historians to suggest that women in Scythian society could play roles not only as leaders but also as skilled riders and warriors. Family and clan ties formed the backbone of Scythian society. Each tribe was a large extended family with elders guiding decisions and traditions. Loyalty to one's clan was essential, and gatherings were often held to celebrate seasonal festivals, trade, or forge alliances. These events were not only political but also cultural, filled with music, storytelling, and rituals that connected the community to their shared heritage. At first glance, it might seem difficult to imagine a strong economy in a land without permanent cities or farms. Yet the Scythians built a thriving system based on what the steppe offered. Their wealth came from livestock, especially horses, sheep, and cattle. Animal products, milk, wool, and hides were essential to daily life. But the Scythians were not isolated herders. They quickly realized the potential of their position on the steppe as a crossroads between civilizations. They became active participants in long-distance trade, linking the Greeks to the west with peoples of Central Asia and beyond. Greek colonies along the Black Sea, such as Olbia and Chersonesus, became important trading partners. From the Scythians, the Greeks obtained grain, furs, and slaves, while the Scythians in return acquired wine, fine pottery, and luxury goods. This interaction not only enriched the Scythians materially, but also exposed them to new cultural influences, blending their traditions with foreign ideas in fascinating ways. One of the most striking legacies of the classical Scythian period is their art, particularly their skill in working with gold. Buried beneath the mounds known as kurgans, archaeologists have uncovered dazzling treasures: golden ornaments, jewelry, and weapons decorated with intricate animal motifs. The animal style of Scythian art became their signature. It featured dynamic, flowing images of deer, eagles, panthers, and mythical creatures locked in motion. These designs were not merely decorative, they carried symbolic meaning, representing strength, vitality, and the interconnectedness of life. These golden artifacts reveal a society that valued beauty as much as practicality. They also highlight the Scythians' role as cultural intermediaries. Many objects show a blend of steppe traditions with Greek craftsmanship, suggesting a vibrant exchange of ideas across borders. The Greeks, who recorded much of what we know about the Scythians, were both fascinated and perplexed by them. To Greek writers like Herodotus, the Scythians represented the opposite of Greek life. Where the Greeks built cities, the Scythians roamed freely. Where the Greeks wrote laws and built courts, the Scythians followed unwritten customs passed down by ancestors. Yet there was also admiration. Greek art often depicted Scythians, easily recognizable by their distinctive clothing, pointed hats, patterned trousers, and riding boots. Greek thinkers even debated the virtues of nomadic life, suggesting that the Scythians enjoyed a kind of freedom and simplicity that city dwellers had lost. The relationship between Greeks and Scythians was complex, sometimes friendly, sometimes hostile, but it was always marked by curiosity and respect. By the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, the Scythians stood at the height of their influence. Their lands stretched across much of the northern Black Sea region, and their reputation as skilled horsemen made them allies or adversaries to great empires. Even the mighty Persians took them seriously, struggling to subdue them despite their vast resources. For centuries, the Scythians maintained a delicate balance between preserving their nomadic traditions and adapting to the changes brought by contact with settled civilizations. This balance defined their classical age, a period when they were both feared and admired, both traditional and innovative, both mysterious and connected. The classical period of the Scythians was not the end of their story, but rather the foundation for what was to come. As trade expanded, as foreign influences deepened, and as neighboring empires grew more ambitious, the Scythians found themselves drawn into larger currents of history. Their mastery of the steppe, their golden art, and their way of life rooted in mobility ensured that they would remain unforgettable. Yet, just as the horizon always shifts with each step forward, so too would the Scythians' place in history evolve. The next chapter in their journey would not be defined solely by what they created, but also by what they absorbed, from traders, travelers, and powerful neighbors who brought new beliefs, technologies, and challenges. The world was opening up, and the Scythians were standing right at its crossroads. The Scythians were a people of the steppe, free from walls, kings, and fixed borders. Yet, as their power and reputation grew, they could not remain untouched by the wider world. Trade, travel, and encounters with great empires brought new ideas, new beliefs, and new challenges. This episode is the story of how outside influences shaped the Scythians, transforming them from isolated nomads into vital players in a network that spanned continents. By the 6th century BCE, the Scythians were no longer hidden in the endless grasslands. Their roaming territories touched the borders of great civilizations, the Persians to the southeast, the Greeks to the south, and other nomadic groups to the east. Their position made them a bridge between worlds. The Black Sea region, where Greek colonies had been established, became one of the Scythians' most important gateways to foreign cultures. Merchants from cities like Olbia, Pantikapaeum, and Chersonesus carried goods, ideas, and stories that mingled with Scythian traditions. The steppe was no longer just a wilderness, it was becoming part of a vast system of exchange. Among all the foreign influences, the Greeks played perhaps the most significant role in shaping how we remember the Scythians. Greek colonists on the northern shores of the Black Sea established lively trade with their nomadic neighbors. The Scythians supplied grain from fertile lands near the steppe, as well as furs, honey, wax, and livestock. In return, they received wine, fine pottery, olive oil, and luxury goods. These Greek imports became symbols of wealth and status among Scythian elites. Archaeologists have uncovered ornate Greek amphorae and painted vases in Scythian burial mounds, evidence of a flourishing cultural exchange. But the relationship went deeper than trade. Greeks and Scythians influenced each other's art, religion, and even daily customs. Scythian goldwork began to reflect Greek craftsmanship, while Greek pottery sometimes depicted Scythian riders in their distinctive pointed hats and patterned trousers. To the Greeks, the Scythians were both exotic and admirable. Writers such as Herodotus described their customs in vivid detail, how they lived, how they celebrated, and how they honored their gods. Through these writings, the Scythians entered the imagination of the ancient Mediterranean world. To the east, the Persians also took notice of the Scythians. The Achaemenid Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great and expanded by Darius the Thirfer, stretched across a vast portion of Asia. For the Persians, controlling the steppe was a challenge, for the nomadic Scythians could not be contained by walls or conquered cities. The Persians attempted to extend their influence into Scythian lands, but direct conquest proved elusive. Instead, relations often took the form of alliances, skirmishes, or negotiated peace. The Scythians' reputation as swift horsemen earned them respect even from this mighty empire. In time, some Scythian groups served as mercenaries in Persian armies, their skill with the bow on horseback making them invaluable. This interaction exposed the Scythians to new technologies and cultural practices. Through Persia, they encountered influences from Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and even distant India. The steppe was becoming not just a crossroads between East and West, but a place where worlds met and blended. Outside contact also shaped Scythian spiritual life. While the Scythians continued to worship deities tied to nature, the sky, earth, fire, and water, they began adopting elements from Greek and Persian religious traditions. For example, the Scythians were known to revere a goddess of fertility and the earth, sometimes associated with the Greek goddess Artemis or the Persian Anahita. Likewise, their supreme sky god was often compared by outsiders to Zeus. Though the Scythians maintained their own beliefs, these comparisons reveal how interconnected religious ideas became in this period. This blending of traditions did not erase Scythian identity. Instead, it enriched their worldview, creating a spiritual landscape where native steppe beliefs stood alongside echoes of Greek and Persian gods. Art became one of the clearest expressions of outside influence. Scythian craftsmen had long excelled at creating golden ornaments, but contact with Greeks and Persians expanded their techniques and styles. In Scythian burial sites, archaeologists have discovered objects that combine steppe animal motifs with Greek-inspired realism. Golden plaques show not only stylized deer and panthers but also scenes of human life, influenced by Greek artistic traditions. Meanwhile, Persian-inspired designs added new decorative elements, from floral patterns to winged creatures. These artistic treasures reveal a culture that was not static but dynamic, absorbing and transforming influences to create something uniquely Scythian. The steppe itself became a highway of cultural exchange. Goods and ideas moved across it in both directions, and the Scythians often acted as intermediaries. From the east, they brought precious stones, silk, and exotic goods toward the west. From the west, they carried Greek pottery, wine, and art eastward. In this way, the Scythians played a quiet but significant role in laying the foundations of what would later become the Silk Road. Though the great trade routes of Eurasia had not yet fully developed, the Scythians were already part of the web of connections that would eventually link China to the Mediterranean. Yet outside influence was not without its challenges. Contact with wealthier urban civilizations created new inequalities within Scythian society. Elites who controlled trade became richer, while ordinary herders often remained tied to their traditional ways. The allure of Greek wine, Persian luxury goods, and imported treasures may also have pulled some Scythian leaders toward more sedentary lifestyles, creating tension between the old nomadic traditions and new influences. This tension between movement and settlement, tradition and change, would shape Scythian society in the centuries to come. What made the Scythians unique in this period was their ability to absorb outside influences without losing their own identity. They did not become Greek or Persian, but they did adopt and adapt what they encountered. This adaptability impressed outsiders. To the Greeks, the Scythians were free and untamed, yet sophisticated enough to engage in trade and diplomacy. To the Persians, they were elusive rivals, yet valuable allies and mercenaries. To later civilizations, they became symbols of resilience, embodying both tradition and innovation. By the end of their classical age, the Scythians had become more than just nomads of the steppe. They were cultural intermediaries, spiritual innovators, and economic players in a world that was growing increasingly connected. But outside influence also set the stage for new challenges. Wealth and foreign contact brought growth, yet they also brought dependency and division. As history would soon show, the Scythians would need to navigate these changes carefully if they wished to maintain their unique place in the world. The next stage in their story, the period of growth, would test their ability to adapt further. New technologies, expanding trade routes, and powerful empires were reshaping Eurasia. For the Scythians, the question was whether they could continue to thrive in a changing world, or whether they would be overshadowed by the very influences that once enriched them. The horizon was still wide, but the winds of change were beginning to stir. The Scythians began as nomads of the open steppe, shaped by wind, grass, and horses. Over time, outside contacts with the Greeks and Persians brought them new opportunities, new goods, and new ideas. By the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, they entered a remarkable period of growth, a time when their influence spread wider, their economy expanded, and their culture reached new heights. This was the age when the Scythians transformed from mysterious wanderers into a powerful civilization standing at the crossroads of the ancient world. Expanding horizons. The Scythians' greatest strength remained their mobility. Unlike empires tied to fixed borders, they could extend their influence across vast regions without building cities or walls. Their territory stretched from the northern shores of the Black Sea deep into Central Asia. This expansion was not the result of conquest in the way settled empires expanded, but through the steady presence of Scythian tribes who moved their herds, established trade connections, and asserted control over routes that others depended on. This flexible style of expansion gave them resilience. If pressure came from one direction, they could shift elsewhere like waves rolling across the sea of grass. Over time, the Scythians created a loose but powerful confederation that touched the lands of Greece, Persia, and beyond. Masters of the horse. During this period, the Scythians perfected what can only be described as a horse-based civilization. Horses were not just animals for transport. They were the heart of Scythian identity, economy, and power. The Scythians developed specialized equipment to enhance their horsemanship. Saddles, bridles, and stirrup-like supports made riding more efficient and comfortable, allowing them to cover immense distances with ease. They bred hardy steppe horses capable of surviving the extremes of climate, ensuring that mobility was always possible, no matter the season. This horse culture gave them unmatched military strength. Armies of Scythian riders could move faster than any infantry force, launching swift raids and disappearing before enemies could respond. But horses also held economic value. They were traded, gifted as symbols of alliance, and honored in rituals. Archaeological discoveries of horse burials alongside human remains show how deeply the Scythians revered these animals, seeing them as partners in both life and death. Technological and artistic growth. The Age of Growth was not only about expansion across land, but also about advancements in technology and art. The Scythians refined their famous composite bows, making them smaller, more powerful, and more suited for horseback use. Their mastery of iron and bronze tools also grew, giving them improved weapons, horse gear, and agricultural instruments. But perhaps the most celebrated advancement was in their artistry. The Scythians continued to create golden ornaments of astonishing beauty, now blending influences from Greece, Persia, and their own traditions. Golden plaques depict animals in mid-motion, their bodies curved and dynamic, capturing the energy of the steppe itself. Other pieces show scenes of daily life, hunting, and ritual, reflecting the growing complexity of their society. Each discovery from Scythian burial mounds tells a story of creativity and craftsmanship. Far from being uncivilized nomads, the Scythians demonstrated an artistic sophistication that rivaled that of their settled neighbors. If the horse was the heart of Scythian life, trade was its lifeblood during this age. Positioned at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, the Scythians became central players in long-distance exchange. They supplied grain from fertile lands near the Black Sea, traded furs and animal products from the steppe, and even acted as middlemen in the movement of luxury goods such as silk and precious stones. Greek merchants eagerly sought Scythian products, while Scythian elites prized Greek pottery, wine, and metalwork. This exchange enriched both sides and deepened the bond between nomadic and urban worlds. In many ways, the Scythians were early pioneers of what would later become the Silk Road. Their mobility allowed them to carry goods across immense distances, connecting cultures that might otherwise never have met. The steppe, once seen as a barrier, had become a highway of growth. With growth came the need for new forms of leadership. While Scythian society remained tribal and decentralized, there is evidence that powerful leaders emerged during this period, often called kings by Greek writers. These leaders likely coordinated alliances, trade, and defense, ensuring that the Scythians could act with unity when needed. Royal burial mounds, some more than 20 meters high, suggest that Scythian elites commanded great wealth and influence. These mounds contained not only gold ornaments but also weapons, horses, and imported treasures, symbols of a leader's authority and connections. Yet, Scythian leadership remained different from the rigid monarchies of Persia or Egypt. Power was shared among clans and reinforced through personal loyalty rather than bureaucracy. This flexibility gave them strength but also set the stage for future tensions when unity was tested. By the height of their growth, the Scythians were no longer seen as distant nomads but as key players in the international arena. They influenced Greek politics, at times serving as allies or mercenaries. They confronted the Persians, resisting attempts at domination while also engaging in trade and cooperation. Their reputation as horse warriors spread far beyond their own lands. To many ancient peoples, the very idea of the nomadic rider became synonymous with the Scythians. They were admired for their freedom, feared for their speed, and respected for their ability to thrive in environments that others considered inhospitable. Growth was not just material, but cultural. Scythian rituals became more elaborate, blending their own traditions with influences from neighbors. Seasonal festivals honored gods of the sky and earth, while rites of passage marked important stages of life. Music, storytelling, and oral traditions flourished, carrying the memory of ancestors across generations. This cultural richness ensured that the Scythians were not merely adapting to outside influences. They were shaping a distinct identity that blended old and new. Their art, their horsemanship, and their mobile lifestyle set them apart, even as they became part of a wider network of civilizations. The age of growth was a time of prosperity, but prosperity often brings its own challenges. As Scythian elites became wealthier through trade, inequalities began to emerge. The lure of Greek luxuries and Persian influence tempted some leaders to adopt foreign customs, raising questions about the balance between tradition and change. At the same time, new nomadic groups were beginning to rise in the east, pushing westward and challenging Scythian dominance. The world was never still, and the steppe was always shifting. The very mobility that had given the Scythians strength would soon be tested by others who had learned from their example. For now, however, the Scythians stood at their height. They had expanded across the steppe, built a thriving economy, developed extraordinary artistry, and established themselves as respected figures in the ancient world. Their golden treasures gleamed in burial mounds, their horses thundered across the plains, and their name carried weight in the courts of kings and emperors. The age of growth was the Scythians' moment of brilliance, a reminder that even nomadic peoples without cities or monuments could achieve greatness. Yet, as history often teaches, every period of growth carries within it the seeds of crisis. The horizon was still wide, but shadows were beginning to gather. The next chapter of their story would be one of challenges, struggles, and the search for survival in a world that was changing faster than ever before. No civilization enjoys uninterrupted growth. For every period of prosperity, history records moments of strain, when the forces that once made a people strong begin to shift and weaken. For the Scythians, the centuries following their golden age were marked by trials that tested their unity, resilience, and identity. This was their time of challenges, a season of turbulence where internal divisions, external pressures, and shifting dynamics threatened their place in the world. The Eurasian steppe was never empty. Just as the Scythians had once risen from its endless grasslands, new nomadic groups were constantly emerging. By the 3rd century BCE, other peoples, such as the Sarmatians, began moving westward, pushing into territories long dominated by the Scythians. These migrations were not sudden invasions, but gradual waves of pressure. Clans and tribes shifted along the great highway of the steppe, competing for pastures, trade routes, and influence. The Scythians, once unrivaled masters of this world, now faced challengers who had learned from their example. The Sarmatians, skilled riders in their own right, adopted many Scythian techniques, from horseback archery to nomadic organization. The teacher was beginning to be challenged by the student. At the same time, challenges arose from within. The very prosperity of the age of growth had created inequalities. Elite Scythian leaders, enriched by trade with the Greeks and Persians, had grown accustomed to luxury goods, fine wines, imported pottery, and ornate jewelry. Burial mounds from this period reveal a widening gap between the rich and the ordinary herders of the steppe. This imbalance risked eroding the traditional bonds of kinship that had once united the tribes. Where loyalty had once flowed naturally through shared traditions and responsibilities, it was now complicated by wealth, rivalry, and power. Maintaining unity among the Scythian clans became increasingly difficult. Relations with the Greeks, once mutually beneficial, also grew more complicated. While trade remained vital, competition over land and resources led to tensions. Greek colonies along the Black Sea sometimes clashed with Scythian groups over control of fertile farmland and trade routes. Herodotus, writing earlier, had described the Scythians with fascination. But later Greek sources paint a more ambivalent picture, reflecting the difficulties of balancing cooperation and rivalry. At times, Scythian rulers allied with Greek city-states, providing military support or forming trade agreements. At other times, they turned against them, seeking to reassert control over territories they considered their own. This complicated relationship with the Greeks reflected a larger truth. As the Scythians became more enmeshed in the affairs of their neighbors, they could no longer act with the freedom of earlier centuries. They were now part of a wider, more competitive system, one that demanded difficult choices. Beyond the Greeks and Sarmatians, other powerful forces loomed. The Persians had long been rivals and occasional allies, but by the 4th century BCE, new players entered the stage. Most famously, Alexander the Great's campaigns reshaped the balance of power across much of Eurasia. Although Alexander never directly conquered Scythian heartlands, his conquests destabilized the regions around them. New trade routes, shifting alliances, and the rise of successor kingdoms created fresh pressures. For nomadic peoples like the Scythians, these changes meant adapting to a rapidly evolving political landscape. Some Scythian groups integrated into these new systems, serving as mercenaries or traders. Others resisted, clinging to their traditions. The challenge was not only survival, but also relevance. How to maintain their identity in a world increasingly dominated by expanding empires. Perhaps the greatest challenge of this era was cultural rather than military or economic. As foreign influences deepened, Scythians faced a question at the heart of every society. How much change can be embraced without losing one's essence? The Scythians had long thrived on adaptability, blending elements of Greek and Persian culture with their own. But as pressures mounted, some feared that the old ways were fading. Wealth, luxury, and foreign customs could erode the nomadic values of freedom, mobility, and equality that had once defined them. This crisis of identity was not unique to the Scythians. Many peoples throughout history have faced similar dilemmas. Yet, for a nomadic society without permanent cities or written laws, traditions carried even greater weight. To lose them was to risk dissolving into the cultures of others. By the 2nd century BCE, signs of decline became evident. Archaeological evidence shows fewer grand burial mounds, suggesting a reduction in wealth and power. Historical records indicate that Scythian influence over the northern Black Sea region had weakened, with the Sarmatians gradually taking control. Some Scythian groups migrated, retreating into the Crimean Peninsula, where they established smaller settlements and kingdoms. These communities retained elements of Scythian culture but were far from the vast, roaming confederations of earlier centuries. The open steppe, once dominated by Scythian riders, was increasingly shared with or overtaken by others. Yet it would be wrong to imagine the Scythians vanishing overnight. Even in decline, they showed remarkable resilience. Those who settled in Crimea adapted to a more sedentary lifestyle, blending with Greek and other local cultures while still maintaining aspects of their identity. Others integrated into new nomadic groups, carrying Scythian traditions into the societies that replaced them. In this way, the Scythians left a kind of living legacy. Even when their political power waned, their skills, customs, and art endured, echoes of their culture carried forward by those who succeeded them. The Scythians' period of crisis reveals an important truth about history, that greatness is never permanent, and that survival often depends on adaptability. The very qualities that once made the Scythians strong, mobility, freedom, and openness to influence, became sources of vulnerability when the balance shifted. But this does not diminish their achievements. Instead, it highlights the cyclical nature of history. Just as the Scythians had once risen from the grasslands to challenge empires, so too did others rise after them, shaped in part by the paths they had forged. As the curtain closed on their period of challenges, the Scythians were no longer the dominant force of the steppe. Yet their story was not finished. In the centuries that followed, they would undergo transformation, adapting to new realities, modernizing in unexpected ways, and leaving behind a legacy that outlived their political power. The age of crisis was a reminder that no civilization exists in isolation. The Scythians were part of a larger world, influenced by forces both near and far. Their ability to endure, even in smaller, changed forms, speaks to the strength of their traditions and the resilience of their spirit. The next chapter in their story, the Age of Modernization, would show how even a people rooted in the mobility of the steppe could find ways to reinvent themselves in a changing world. By the time the Scythians entered the later chapters of their history, they were no longer the unchallenged masters of the steppe. The rise of rivals such as the Sarmatians had forced them to retreat from parts of their old territory, and their once vast influence had narrowed. Yet the Scythians did not simply fade away. Instead, they adapted. They embraced new technologies, adopted new ways of living, and found opportunities in the midst of change. This was their road to modernization, a period of transformation that revealed their resilience and ability to reinvent themselves. For centuries, the Scythians had defined themselves as nomads, forever moving with their herds across the open steppe. But by the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, many Scythian groups began shifting toward a more settled way of life. This transition was most evident in the Crimean Peninsula, where Scythian communities established towns and small fortified centers. The most famous of these was Scythian Neapolis, located near modern-day Simferopol. Here, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of stone walls, houses, workshops, and even public buildings. The Scythians who lived in Neapolis were no longer only herders and riders, they were farmers, artisans, and traders. They cultivated crops, produced pottery, and minted their own coins. This change marked a profound transformation. The Scythians had once defined themselves by their freedom from walls, but now they were building them. Yet, this was not a simple abandonment of tradition. Rather, it was an adaptation to new circumstances. Settlement allowed them to secure their position in a world where nomadic dominance was no longer guaranteed. Alongside settlement came technological progress. The Scythians continued to refine their use of iron tools and weapons, adopting techniques from their neighbors. Farming implements improved, enabling them to cultivate the fertile lands of Crimea more effectively. Pottery production expanded, blending traditional designs with Hellenistic influences. Coinage represented another step toward modernization. By minting their own coins, Scythian leaders in Crimea integrated themselves into the economic systems of the wider Mediterranean world. Money facilitated trade with Greek colonies and other neighbors, allowing Scythian communities to thrive despite their reduced territories. The continued use of the composite bow and advanced horse gear also showed that, even as they embraced new practices, the Scythians did not abandon their heritage. Instead, they combined old strengths with new technologies, creating a culture that was both rooted in tradition and open to change. Modernization also required political adaptation. In earlier times, Scythian society had been loosely organized, with tribes united by kinship and alliances. But in settled communities like Scythian Neapolis, more centralized forms of leadership emerged. Rulers such as Scythians, a king of the Crimean Scythians in the 2nd century BCE, established dynastic control and strengthened political institutions. Scythians built alliances with neighboring powers, issued coinage in his name, and sought to defend Scythian territories through diplomacy as well as military strength. This shift toward monarchy reflected the changing needs of the Scythians. In a world of fortified cities and powerful kingdoms, they needed leaders who could negotiate treaties, oversee trade, and maintain order. Though different from their tribal past, this new political structure allowed them to remain significant players in regional affairs. As they settled, the Scythians also absorbed more cultural influences from their neighbors. In Crimea, they lived alongside Greek colonists, and this proximity left a visible mark on their way of life. Greek-style architecture appeared in Scythian towns, while imported pottery and art became part of daily life. Some Scythian rulers even adopted elements of Hellenistic culture, commissioning inscriptions in Greek and engaging in diplomatic exchanges with nearby Greek states. At the same time, Scythian traditions endured. Burial mounds continued to be built, preserving the nomadic practice of honoring the dead with rich grave goods. Scythian art retained its signature animal motifs, even as new styles were added. Clothing and weaponry still reflected steppe traditions, with trousers, boots, and bows remaining part of daily attire. This blending of cultures created a hybrid identity, neither fully Greek nor fully nomadic, but uniquely Scythian. It demonstrated their ability to adapt without losing their essence. The Scythians' modernization also brought deeper economic integration. Agriculture provided a steady food supply, while trade linked them to Mediterranean markets. Grain, honey, and livestock remained important exports, but Scythian craftsmen also produced goods for trade, including pottery, jewelry, and textiles. Their position in Crimea allowed them to control key routes between the steppe and the sea. This strategic location made them valuable partners and sometimes rivals to Greek colonies and later Roman interests. Though no longer rulers of vast territories, the Scythians remained important because of their control over these connections. Modernization, however, was not without its difficulties. Settling in towns and adopting new ways of life created tensions between old and new. Some Scythian groups resisted these changes, preferring to maintain their nomadic traditions. Others embraced settlement but struggled with the challenges of urban living, including defense and resource management. External pressures also remained. The Sarmatians continued to press westward, while new powers, including the expanding Roman Republic, began to cast their influence across the Black Sea. The Scythians, caught between powerful neighbors, had to navigate carefully to survive. Despite these challenges, the Scythians demonstrated remarkable resilience. They had transformed from steppe nomads into urban settlers without losing their core identity. Their art, their traditions, and their horse culture remained alive, even as they embraced new technologies and political systems. This ability to adapt is one of the most striking aspects of Scythian history. Many nomadic peoples vanished when faced with external pressures, absorbed entirely into other cultures. The Scythians, by contrast, managed to preserve a sense of who they were, even as they changed. By the 1st century CE, the Scythians' political power had greatly diminished. The rise of the Sarmatians, the expansion of Rome, and the shifting dynamics of the steppe left them increasingly marginalized. Scythian Neapolis eventually fell, and their remaining communities were absorbed into other cultures. Yet this was not the end of their story. Their modernization ensured that their influence continued, not as rulers of vast lands, but as contributors to the cultural mosaic of Eurasia. Their art, their horsemanship, and their traditions lived on, shaping the peoples who succeeded them. The road to modernization was not about preserving power forever, but about leaving a legacy that would endure. The Scythians may have changed form, but they did not vanish. Instead, they became part of the deeper current of history, remembered not only for their golden past, but for their remarkable ability to adapt to the challenges of their time. As the Scythians moved toward the close of their independent story, their role in the wider history of the world became clearer. They were not just nomads of the steppe. They were innovators, intermediaries, and survivors. Their influence stretched far beyond their own lands, shaping the development of cultures across Europe and Asia. The next chapter, their role in world history, would explore the true scope of their contribution, revealing how a people of the saddle helped to shape civilizations far beyond the horizon of the steppe. When looking back at the Scythians, it is tempting to think of them only as fierce nomads of the Eurasian steppe, famous for their mastery of the horse and bow. Yet their role in world history goes far beyond their reputation as warriors. They were a bridge between cultures, a force that shaped the strategies of empires, and a people whose way of life influenced generations long after their political power faded. To understand their true significance, we must look at the many ways the Scythians left their mark on the world. The Scythians are often remembered first and foremost as unparalleled horsemen. They perfected a way of life built around mobility, speed, and adaptability. With the horse at the center of their culture, they developed tactics and technologies that reshaped the dynamics of warfare. The use of the composite bow from horseback, combined with their ability to move swiftly across vast distances, gave them an unmatched advantage. Empires that encountered them, such as Persia under Darius the Wekers, were forced to rethink their military strategies. Later, other nomadic groups, from the Sarmatians to the Huns, followed in their footsteps, adopting the same mobile style of combat that the Scythians had pioneered. In this sense, the Scythians laid the groundwork for a tradition of mounted warfare that would dominate Eurasia for centuries. Every empire that sought to control the steppe had to contend with the legacy of Scythian mobility. The position of the Scythians on the Eurasian steppe gave them a unique role. They were the guardians and gatekeepers of routes that connected east and west. The lands they controlled formed part of the early trade networks that would later develop into the Silk Road. Through Scythian territory moved not only goods, but also ideas. Metalwork, textiles, and artworks passed through their lands, linking cultures as distant as China and Greece. Scythian merchants and intermediaries helped to spread innovations, creating a cultural exchange that enriched the ancient world. In this way, the Scythians were more than nomads. They were connectors, people who tied together different parts of the ancient world, ensuring that no civilization remained isolated. Perhaps the clearest evidence of Scythian influence can be seen in their interactions with the Greeks. Along the Black Sea coast, Greek colonies such as Olbia, Chersonesus, and Panticapaeum lived side by side with Scythian communities. This proximity fostered trade, cultural exchange, and even political alliances. Greek writers such as Herodotus recorded stories of the Scythians, fascinated by their customs, legends, and way of life. While some accounts leaned toward myth, they reflected genuine curiosity and respect. The Greeks admired Scythian archery, adopting elements of their equipment and techniques. In Athens, Scythian archers even served as a kind of police force, illustrating how far their influence reached. Greek art also absorbed Scythian motifs. The famed Scythian animal style, with its swirling depictions of stags, eagles, and panthers, left a mark on Greek decorative traditions. In turn, Scythian artisans borrowed from Greek styles, creating a unique blend of steppe and Hellenic artistry. The Scythians also played a significant role in the history of the Persian Empire. When Darius the Lion attempted to subdue them in the 6th century BCE, his campaign ended in frustration. The Scythians avoided direct confrontation, using their mobility to deny the Persians any chance of victory. This encounter demonstrated to Persia and to the wider world that the Scythians were not easily conquered. Later, the Scythians would sometimes serve as allies of Persia, participating in military campaigns and forming diplomatic ties. This dual role, both as adversaries and as partners, showed the complexity of their relationship with empires. They were not simply outsiders to civilization. They were active participants in shaping it. The legacy of the Scythians extended beyond their immediate neighbors. Their way of life became a model for later nomadic empires. The Sarmatians, who replaced them in much of the steppe, adopted many Scythian traditions, from burial practices to horsemanship. Centuries later, the Huns, Turks, and Mongols would inherit and refine the mobile strategies first developed by the Scythians. In this sense, the Scythians can be seen as the ancestors of the great nomadic empires of Eurasia. The rise of Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire, though separated from the Scythians by many centuries, was built on foundations they had laid long before. Beyond warfare and politics, the Scythians also left a cultural legacy. Their art, particularly their gold work, remains among the most striking achievements of the ancient world. Intricate jewelry, plaques, and ornaments reveal not only their craftsmanship, but also their world view, filled with symbols of animals, nature, and myth. These artistic traditions influenced surrounding cultures and continue to captivate modern audiences. The discovery of Scythian artifacts in burial mounds has provided priceless insights into their society, ensuring that their cultural contributions are not forgotten. In world history, the Scythians also became a symbol, sometimes of freedom, sometimes of fear, and sometimes of the unknown. To settled civilizations, they represented the wildness of the steppe, a reminder that beyond the walls of cities there existed another kind of power, untamed and unpredictable. At the same time, they came to embody the ideal of resilience. Despite lacking the monumental architecture of Egypt or the bureaucratic systems of Rome, they survived and thrived for centuries by adapting to the land around them. Their society was built on flexibility, and that flexibility allowed them to influence larger, more rigid civilizations. What makes the Scythians' role in world history so fascinating is that it was often quiet rather than loud. They did not build vast empires that lasted for millennia, nor did they leave behind towering monuments. Instead, their influence spread through connections, exchanges, and inspiration. They were teachers of mobility, masters of the horse, and pioneers of the cultural networks that would eventually become the Silk Road. They proved that power was not only about cities and walls, but also about the ability to move, adapt, and connect. By the time the Scythians faded as a distinct political force, their role in history was secure. They had shaped the strategies of empires, enriched the art of neighboring cultures, and set in motion traditions that would echo across Eurasia. Their influence lived on not only in the peoples who followed them, but also in the imagination of later generations. Historians, archaeologists, and storytellers continue to study and celebrate them, fascinated by people who defied simple definitions. In the story of world history, the Scythians remind us that even those without great cities or vast armies can shape the destiny of civilizations. Their role was not always visible on the surface, but it was vital, woven into the very fabric of Eurasia. As we move toward the final chapter, their legacy and the lessons they leave for the future, the Scythians stand before us not as relics of a forgotten past, but as a people whose spirit of adaptability and resilience continues to inspire. The Scythians may have vanished as a distinct people many centuries ago, but their story has never truly ended. Instead, it lives on in artifacts buried beneath the earth, in the traditions of successor cultures, and in the imagination of those who continue to study them. Their legacy is not only about what they achieved in their own time, but also about what they symbolize for the future: adaptability, resilience, and the power of cultural connection. For centuries, much of what we knew about the Scythians came from Greek writers such as Herodotus, whose vivid accounts shaped the image of this mysterious people. Yet words alone could never capture the full picture. It was only in the modern era, through archaeology, that the Scythians began to speak for themselves. Across the Eurasian steppe, from Ukraine to Siberia, archaeologists uncovered kurgans, the great burial mounds of Scythian nobles. Within these tombs lay gold ornaments, weapons, textiles, and even remarkably preserved remains of horses. These discoveries revealed a world of artistry and ritual, a society deeply connected to animals, nature, and spirituality. The artifacts also confirmed what ancient writers had hinted at. The Scythians were not simply warriors, but creators of sophisticated culture. Each discovery added new layers to their legacy, showing that their contributions reached far beyond battlefields. Although the Scythians eventually disappeared as a distinct political entity, their traditions lived on in the peoples who followed them. The Sarmatians, Alans, and later nomadic groups of the steppe adopted elements of Scythian horsemanship, weaponry, and burial practices. Their art, particularly the animal motifs, echoed in the designs of successor cultures for centuries. Even in medieval Europe, echoes of Scythian traditions could be found. The image of the mounted archer, striking with speed and precision, remained a powerful symbol in military thought. In this way, the Scythians never truly vanished. They became part of the living heritage of Eurasia. The legacy of the Scythians is not confined to history books or museums. Their way of life offers lessons that resonate strongly in today's world. First, their adaptability. The Scythians thrived not by building permanent cities or fortresses, but by learning to live in harmony with a harsh environment. Their ability to adjust to shifting circumstances made them resilient, a quality that remains vital in a world facing rapid change. Second, their role as connectors. The Scythians understood the importance of networks, of moving not just goods, but also ideas across vast distances. In a modern era defined by globalization, their example reminds us that true strength often lies in building bridges rather than walls. Finally, their respect for nature. The Scythians lived in constant relationship with the land and the animals that sustained them. Their art, filled with images of stags, eagles, and panthers, reflected a world view in which humans were part of a larger natural order. This perspective carries timeless wisdom for a world grappling with environmental challenges. Today, the Scythians continue to capture the imagination of people across the globe. Exhibitions of Scythian treasures in museums draw enormous crowds, fascinated by the glitter of gold and the mystery of the steppe. Writers, filmmakers, and game designers borrow from their legends, presenting them as symbols of freedom and untamed spirit. In this sense, the Scythians have become more than a historical people. They are a cultural archetype. They embody the allure of the nomadic life, the romance of endless horizons, and the courage of those who refuse to be bound by walls. Yet the future of the Scythians' legacy also faces challenges. Many of their burial sites lie in regions affected by conflict, environmental change, or looting. Protecting these archaeological treasures is essential if their story is to be preserved for generations to come. There is also the challenge of interpretation. Because the Scythians left no written records of their own, their history has always been filtered through the eyes of others, Greeks, Persians, and later historians. Modern scholarship must continue to piece together their story carefully, respecting the voices of the past while avoiding stereotypes. At the same time, the future holds exciting opportunities. Advances in science, such as DNA analysis and imaging technology, are providing new insights into the lives of the Scythians. We can now learn about their diet, their migrations, and even their physical appearance in ways unimaginable a century ago. Digital platforms also allow for the Scythian story to reach new audiences. Interactive maps, virtual reconstructions of burial mounds, and online exhibitions make their legacy accessible to people far beyond the steppe. In this way, the Scythians are finding new life in the digital age, inspiring curiosity among younger generations. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the Scythians lies in what they symbolize. They remind us that power does not always come from monuments or empires. Sometimes it comes from the ability to move with the winds, to adapt to the land, and to create beauty in unexpected places. The Scythians also remind us of the interconnectedness of human history. No civilization exists in isolation. All are shaped by encounters with others. The Scythians, standing between East and West, were proof of this truth thousands of years ago, and their story continues to affirm it today. The story of the Scythians began with the wide grasslands of the Eurasian steppe, and a people who learned to live upon them with unmatched skill. It passed through encounters with great empires, periods of growth and crisis, and eventual transformation. Yet, in the end, their spirit was never extinguished. Today, the Scythians live on, in gold ornaments glinting in museum cases, in the traditions of descendant peoples, and in the lessons they offer to our world. They stand as a reminder that history is not only about what is built in stone, but also about the ideas, practices, and connections that endure beyond time. As we look to the future, the Scythians call us to embrace adaptability, resilience, and respect for the world around us. Their story, once thought lost to the winds of the steppe, continues to inspire, proving that even those who seem to vanish can leave a legacy that shapes the ages. And so, the Scythians remind us that history is not only written in stone or cities, but also in the wind, in movement, and in the spirit of freedom. Their legacy still whispers across the steppe, waiting for us to listen. If you enjoyed this journey into the forgotten world of the Scythians, don't stop here, subscribe, share this story, and join me for more hidden chapters of history you won't find in textbooks. The past is full of secrets. Let's uncover them together.